Hi.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. This is our staff meeting training for the February 3rd, 2025 staff meeting. And I am super excited to have with me Izzy Pike, who, in addition to being my daughter, as you all know, is also finishing up her master's program at Vanderbilt University. And I don't know how many times at school I've said, I wish we had Isabel here because I would like to ask Izzy some questions about this or wonder about that. And so we thought we would create a training called Ask a Speech Pathologist. Even though technically Isabel is still finishing up her work, she's already had so many experiences and done some really interesting research that I think could be very helpful to us as we think about our own kiddos and students that come through the preschool. So to start, Izzy, why don't you just give us a quick little overview of who you are, what you're studying, and maybe some of your research you've been doing.
I would be happy to. My name is Izzy, daughter to Connie Pike. Uh, I do have one full 4-year degree in communication sciences and disorders. And I have one semester left. I finished all my academic coursework, and I have one semester of my externship, which I start tomorrow at a public school in Nashville. Um, But yeah, I have had placements at Curry Ingram Academy, which was a private school for kids with learning and developmental disabilities. A lot of kids with dyslexia and ADHD and language impairments, primarily. And I also had a placement at I did preschool speech and language screenings at Vanderbilt, in the community where we would meet a kid and have like 20 minutes with their parents and the child to sort of triage them and figure out what they needed an evaluation for if they needed one. So that was a lot of good experience. And I did reading clinic um, with a fourth grade girl. She was supposed to be in fourth grade. She was in third grade because she couldn't read. Um, and I taught her how to read. And for my thesis, I am studying children with speech sound disorders and dyslexia, or broadly reading disabilities. And then two of them have language impairments too. And over the past, how many months? Since June?
July, maybe? Yeah, you started, I think, qualifying them back in
How many
like
is
May,
that?
June. Well, so it's like 8 months at least or
Yeah.
so.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, I haven't, it's a multiple baseline study, single case. So basically, we tested them before on a bunch of stuff, and then I did a reading intervention on Zoom with them for 8 months. Two of them are completely finished now, so we're almost done. And then I've been writing that up. So I'm specifically very interested in literacy, and language, which you cannot separate those. So it's important to be interested in both of them because they co-occur a lot. I also have grown to love speech sound disorders through my thesis. And also all three have ADHD, so that's a given. Um, yeah, so that's a little bit about my experience.
Well, and I think, Izzy, one of the things for me that as a preschool teacher, so much of what I thought about for speech pathologists was articulation related,
Hmm.
maybe a little bit of like expressive language or social language, but really so much of what we would see would be related to just the sounds that the kids were making and
Hmm.
and substitutions. And so it's been really interesting for me to hear about what you're studying because that is just a very little bit at the tip of the iceberg. And
Yeah.
in terms of, so my first question is, I think you would say articulation is probably, I mean, it's important, but
Hmm.
there are bigger issues that you worry about
Hmm.
sooner with kids. And I was wondering if you would share some of those with us today. I think
Yes.
we have a couple of slides even.
Oh yeah, I do. I forgot about those. Um, yeah, I like the iceberg analogy because speech is the visible part often to parents and teachers because it's you know which kids are hard to understand and it's much easier to treat in therapy. There's a lot more research and SLPs have done a better job for a longer time treating speech. But
Mhm.
language is just hard. You just have to know so much about grammar and where kids should be, and it's hard when you think about cognition as a component and language learners and in different dialects. It's just more complicated to identify and treat. So SLPs usually do a worse job, in my experience.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, we know that kids, well, I think that's on the slide. So we'll get to that. I didn't know what to call it, so I think it's just share. I've only
And
been
we'll
on
have,
Zoom for 8 months full time, and yet it still takes me.
yeah,
Hang
and
on.
we'll have these slides. Everyone in the room should be looking at these slides
Yeah.
as we look at this officially tomorrow for the first time.
Wait, how do I? We'll edit around this. Just kidding. How do you? Oh, slideshow. Okay, sorry. Okay. So, speech and language and letters. Okay, so speech delay or speech sound disorders. Um, you already know what it is. It's difficulty with the motor production of speech sounds, often also with just telling the sounds apart generally, um, and understanding the meaning that speech sounds hold. The prevalence is hard to estimate because there's so many different definitions. But we think about the best studies I found, like the population studies, 3 to 11% of preschoolers have speech sound disorders.
Which is quite a
Importantly,
few.
yeah, it is. Um, about 75%, this is good data on this, we're confident, about 75% of kids with speech sound disorders or speech delays normalize by 6 years of age. So by just six, almost 75%, more than 75% are completely caught up.
And is
Um,
that with intervention or without intervention or
both.
both?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Hmm.
impossible to track in the population studies.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, that's important to consider too, of course. But
Mhm.
we know about 1 to 4% persist beyond early childhood. So those will be the later school age kids. I would say like third grade and beyond, and then high school too. And there are some adults we know that have atypical speech patterns. Trying to think of an example. I can't off the top of my head.
Well, that was one of our questions we had from one of our teachers was like,
Mhm.
if you have an adult who still has a lisp, is that something that, like, once you get to that point, is that fixable with adults?
It's hard. So the old school of thinking, you'll hear often that you have until 7 years of age. It's called the critical age hypothesis. And people said that for a long time. But now we think you have until about puberty, like
Mm.
14-ish, I would say. It's different for boys and girls, but for it to be like a seamless, no more lisping, I think after that, it's really hard to rewrite those motor patterns, borderline impossible. I
Hmm.
think you can teach people the sounds like if they say their S's like that, you can
Hmm.
teach them the S, and then I would imagine they just have to consciously do that for every time
Hmm.
they say that sound forever.
Right.
Um, but I don't know. Sometimes you hear stories about people changing things later on. I think you can definitely make improvements if you're like unintelligible as an
Right.
adult. You keep
Yeah.
doing speech therapy for kids with Down syndrome and stuff for a long time. So,
Interesting.
but on the bright side, normal people don't notice small differences in your speech. Like a lot of people don't notice a frontal lisp. It's just
Mhm.
how, some people sound.
Yeah.
It's tricky. Some of these people like can't say their R's, and that's where it gets
Right.
tricky because you sound British. But anyway, yes. So speech is important. It's important to be understood. But most of these kids won't have problems in adulthood. I thought I would add this. Can you see my pointer?
Uh-huh. I can.
Huh. Um, so causes of speech sound disorders. There are kids with known causes like hearing loss, cleft lip and palate. This also includes kids with Down syndrome. Um, Kids with autism are more likely to have speech delays. And then there's a whole other bunch of kids, and we don't know what it is. It's idiopathic, but the assumption is it's genetics because it's more likely to run in families. It's the same as ADHD or
It is
autism.
interesting how many parents will say, "Oh, I had to go to speech when I was a kid,"
Yeah.
or "My mom just helped me when I was a kid."
Mhm.
And so they don't want to send, like, I grew out of it. I'm not going to send him to speech because I didn't have to, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when you encounter those families, you just have to lean on your own expertise as teachers and say, I've seen a lot of kids, and
Mhm.
some of them don't get better without intervention. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
These are popular. There are a lot of myths about speech delays, um, and most of them are about what causes speech delays. Ear infections do not cause speech delays. There's no evidence to support this. unless a kid has ear infections for a long period of time and they never get treated for
Mhm.
it. So some of the data, it looks like ear infections can cause speech delays, but it's because they're from very low socioeconomic
Mm,
status families and they're just not getting proper medical attention. And so then that's hearing loss instead of
yeah.
ear
Hmm.
infection. Ear infections are transient.
Hmm.
Binkies and bottles do not cause speech delays. That's a very common myth.
Yeah, I thought that tongue thrust and like applesauce containers, we've been told that before. Sippy cups.
Yeah.
Oh,
There's no data to
wow,
support that.
interesting.
So typically, the rule of thumb for speech is that the causes and the treatment should all be speech related, if that makes sense. So another one that I don't have on here. Sometimes people will do speech therapy. They'll have kids do non-speech motor exercises. Like
Mhm.
those things, they look like I have paper because I knew I'd want to draw. It looks like, oh, it looks like a T, so I didn't need a drawing. But like the
Uh-huh.
that you like
Yeah.
chew on, and
Hmm.
people will take straws. This is just if you see an SLP doing this, don't send kids to this SLP because it's very bad. Um,
Yeah.
straws and picking up cotton balls and putting them in cups.
Hmm.
Any form of treatment for speech sound disorders that is not directly working on speech sounds is not
Hmm.
evidence-based. There's no evidence, and it
Right.
has been researched. They've tried.
Yeah.
But that would be an easy solution if we could just do
Uh-huh.
an exercise and work a muscle, and
Right.
then fix the problem. But yeah, binkies and bottles do not cause
Okay.
SSD. It does cause social problems
And rotten teeth, I think,
and
for the
Ron, I'm
bottle.
sure dental problems, I'm sure, yes. I'm sure there's a lot of downsides, but
Right.
speech you should I mean if you're trying to talk around it all the time, maybe like
Yeah. Yeah.
it makes it harder to learn speech sounds, but yeah, and then so tongue tie is
We see
it
this a lot. People getting their tongue tie fixed, they'll mention it. Yeah.
really?
Uh-huh.
That's so interesting because I've really
Hmm.
only read about it in the research.
Hmm.
Um, it's the medical term is an enlarged frenulum. That'll
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
good. How big is the screen going to be where you project this?
They can hear that. They can have to hear you go, oh,
Um,
oh,
yeah, pretty much you can make all speech sounds with an enlarged frenulum almost all the time. There may be some drastic cases. Um, One of my professors heard an orthodontist say this. This is the general rule, but I haven't read research on it. If they can lick peanut butter off the top of their mouth, they're fine. I
oh.
think if they can just touch their tongue to the roof of their mouth, that's
Hmm.
all we need to do. We don't,
Oh, make our sounds. Hmm.
yeah, I mean, when you think about it, your tongue just goes, like
Uh,
right behind your teeth and between your teeth. For L's, you kind of pick it up a
yeah.
little bit,
Yeah.
but it's not going to hold you back from speech unless it's really like drastic.
Well, not to be a negative Nelly, but it does create a lot of income for
Oh, absolutely.
so you like
So
to use.
do so do the
Yeah.
mouth tools to do exercises for your mouth,
Right.
not,
Right.
improve your speech.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So if someone, but also again, clipping your tongue, taking your kid to the doctor, clipping their tongue. Oh, now their
Hmm.
speech is perfect. That would be the easy solution. So that's what people are gonna
Hmm.
hope and want to believe is
Right.
true. So that's
Right.
why it's pervasive.
Yeah.
Um, and then tongue thrust. I don't, I've read so much about this and I don't even really understand what people think it is, but it just like your tongue going too far out, which is just a type of lisp.
Uh-huh.
So
Or
it's
weak. It did not just be weak muscle tone in your mouth.
oh yeah. Oh, tongue thrusts for kids with Down syndrome most often.
Mhm.
I've also
Mhm.
seen it. I've seen students who have it who don't have Down syndrome too, but their resting posture will sort of be one of two things, either this or
Mm.
or like that.
Hmm.
You
We
know,
had we had a couple of kiddos we have had over the years. Like I think about one who was in the bridge class and was still wearing kind of a bandana for the drool
yeah,
because his resting posture was that mouth was open. But
yeah,
he had low muscle tone
yeah.
all over. So
So that's sort of a little bit different. But yes,
mhm,
so kids with Down syndrome are the classic example. That's called dysarthria, which is
mhm,
the actual physical muscles are weak.
mhm,
Um, So I'm not sure what the research is on non-speech exercises for drooling.
mhm.
Um, I haven't heard. I haven't. I've heard that there's no, I'm not as expert in this, it's non-speech related, but usually if a kid's resting posture is their mouth open, that sort of like strengthening their muscles won't help that. It's more of like just controlling it.
Excuse
Um,
me, we have some barking here. There's a kid on a bicycle out front, and
can't hear it.
Gus is letting him know he's not
How
welcome at the park
crazy.
house.
Anyway,
Okay,
yeah, so
awesome.
that's speech.
Interesting. Okay.
And then I have a slide on, hello? Oh, questions to ask yourself if you're wondering if you should. I wish I could have these appear one at a time. Oh well.
Mhm.
If you should
Yeah.
refer a child for a full evaluation, because it's hard to
Okay.
know, obviously.
Right.
I think the first one is, are they difficult to understand? So in
Mhm.
preschool, it's well documented that the best measure of kids with speech on disorder or speech delay, if they're going to catch up or not, is how difficult are they to understand.
Okay.
That's when they have
Hmm.
adverse educational and social impact, when they
Hmm.
can't communicate. And you also can't tell, you can't really think about their grammar or if there's a co-occurring language impairment, which is quite common.
Hmm.
Up to 50 to 70% of kids with speech delays also have impaired language.
Which we'll get to in a little bit, right? There's
Yes,
another slide for
I'm
that.
getting ahead
So
of
hold on
myself.
that one. Yeah.
But yeah, are they difficult to understand?
Hmm.
And this is for, is it difficult for the teacher to understand? Do other kids understand them? The biggest one to me, do their parents understand them?
Hmm.
Sometimes the parents also have like some atypical speech and they understand them perfectly well, or they speak multiple languages. Um,
Hmm.
so if their parents don't understand what they're saying, that's red flag.
Right.
Is their speech worse than the other kids in the class? Obviously, and all the teachers have a lot of experience, so you guys are good at. Is my I think my camera might be, sorry. Our picture might be covering some of the words. You should
Okay.
trust yourself, and if you think they're worse, I trust you. Do they drop full sounds and syllables? So if they're trying to say a word, if they're trying to say fire truck, is it like fire, or
Hmm.
like are they dropping full syllables? Nana for banana. Although
Right.
that's kind of common in normal kids, but do they have a sibling or family member with a communication disorder? This could be like autism, language impairment, speech delay,
Hmm.
stuttering. Any communication disorder makes it more likely that you will have persisting issues with your speech and language. And is their family concerned?
Okay.
Let's say if like two or three of these, the answer is yes.
Hmm.
Might think about telling their
So if
parents.
you've got, just as a question, if you've got a kid with like an articulation issue, like he is hard to understand, but it's just in certain sounds, and he's like 4 years old, do you go ahead and make that
I
no?
wouldn't. If he's four and you understand most of what he says or she,
Let it
they
roll.
are probably fine. And if you
Okay.
wait a year and they're still difficult
Hmm.
to understand or they do seem behind, then they can get speech therapy. But there's really not a ton of evidence that getting speech intervention
Hmm.
at 4 is any better than getting it at 5, unless the kid is
Okay.
very unintelligible and you're going to have to work for years and you want to,
Hmm.
start those years of intervention earlier. But most kids, it'll be a year of intervention and they'll be normal if it's good intervention.
Hang on one second. I've got to grab one thing. Hold on.
Pause the
Excuse me.
recording if I remember how, or I can just hang out with everyone watching this
I'm back
asynchronously.
already.
Okay.
We had
Oh,
a little dog issue on the side that's been taken care
what have
of.
I done? Hang on. A dog issue?
A dog issue?
What are they up to?
Oh, making a mess. Much like preschool, I removed the source of the problem.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's speech. So also under the umbrella of speech, there's speech delay, and then we also put stuttering under
Hmm.
the umbrella of speech. And this is just interruptions in the typical fluency of speech. Um, Repetitions, like repetitions, getting stuck on sounds. We know what stuttering is.
Yeah.
So the prevalence, about 10% of preschool children are kids who stutter.
Mm-hmm.
We all stutter in normal life, some more than others. I stutter a lot. I think it's because of ADHD and I just the way I can't think of words sometimes. So it's hard to really measure, but about 10% of preschool children stutter. About 90 of these children will stop stuttering without intervention.
Okay. And
And some estimates are higher
we
too.
have seen kids come through who will develop a stutter while
Mhm.
they're at Pines.
Yeah.
And and sometimes it's related, those are the kids, the two I'm thinking of, there's a lot of anxiety also. Is
Mhm.
that a common thing or
Yes, it's very complicated, and often people oversimplify. There's a high co-occurrence of stuttering and anxiety in the same people, children and
Mhm,
adults. But anxiety does not cause stuttering. There are
mhm,
lots of anxious kids who don't stutter, right?
mhm. Right. Yeah.
And there's some evidence that being a person who stutters is just anxiety inducing because there's so many
Mhm.
adverse social things that happen to you and it's just hard to deal with.
Right.
Um, so anxiety alone doesn't cause stuttering. Also, well, next
Oh,
slide.
here we go. Causes.
Yeah, causes. These are appearing one at a time.
Hmm.
PowerPoint. Um, their causes are twofold: family history, so genetics, and
Hmm.
neurophysiological differences in your brain. So kids who have a parent who used to stutter, maybe they started in preschool and it went away, they're still more likely to stutter. If they
Hmm.
have like an uncle who still stutters, they're highly, at a great big risk for stuttering. Not big,
Okay. Hmm.
family risk is really the indicator. So if they're also anxious, temperament can play a role. Um, there's a lot of research on like impedance in these kids and kids who are ADHD and just have no impulse control might be prone to like more repetitions in their speech
Hmm.
than the kids who are more like pulled back. And it also affects how they deal with being different. So it's very complicated. It's important, very important to note that anxiety does not cause stuttering because that's a really harmful view. We see in popular media all the time. I'm thinking of Harry Potter. What's his name?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
Professor Quirrell, and he
Yes.
pretends to be a person who stutters, so everyone thinks
Hmm.
he's weak and anxious. And there's stuff in Criminal Minds where they'll like pretend, and that's just hurtful and untrue. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, on a quick little aside, you actually worked a camp last summer that was for kids who stutter and came in from all over Tennessee and I guess the country too.
yeah, yeah, we
And
used
can you
to
talk a
fly
little bit
in.
just about what made that so special, I think, for those kids?
Yeah. Oh, I miss it. It's called Camp Talks. It's a long acronym. It's Talking and Learning with Kids Who Stutter. It's through Vanderbilt. It's like Vanderbilt funded, but it's all school-age children who stutter. So I was with a group of elementary school boys, and then there's also it went up to high school. Um, and everyone stutters, and they come in, and it's a day camp for 5 days. But we had families fly in. I can't remember where they were from, somewhere far. And this family stayed at a hotel for the full 5 days. Um, Stuttering is complicated. Again, it's one of the things speech pathologists have been known to do a bad job handling, very bad. Um,
Hmm.
because we know that in preschool and beyond, there is no evidence that fluency, like intervention targeting fluency, so trying to get people to stop stuttering,
Oh.
it does not work. It can't work. There's no way to make it work. You cannot make someone stop stuttering. A lot of people stop stuttering on their own, as we can see by the
Hmm.
9% of children who recover. We call it recovery, which is a terrible term. But yeah, you so therapy is focused, good therapy, speech therapy is focused on reducing the tension of
Oh.
stuttering, which we'll kind of talk about on the next slide of when to be concerned. Because it causes your body stress when people become very tense when they're trying to get the sounds out and they'll look away and close their eyes. And so it's about reducing that tension, reducing your negative emotions to stuttering is the biggest part. So that's what camp was focused on. And sorry, I forgot the other one, reducing tension and then making the environment more conducive to easy and like not stressful communication situations. So a lot of interventions will have families practice not interrupting each other, which our
Hmm.
family
Ooh, that's hard
it
for
could take
us.
a while. Yeah, I know.
Ooh.
We're talkers though.
Yeah.
Yeah, not interrupting as much, talking slower. Um, It's just when there's less, when you're already at risk for disfluencies and it's hard for you to get your words out, and then you're expected to talk fast, and other people are competing for the same, like time, the same
Okay.
space. It's you don't have the faculty. It just makes it worse. You just stutter a lot more, and it's more frustrating. So,
Hmm.
did I get through? Oh,
Yeah.
how
Well, and
unorganized.
I think when the one time I know you need to move on this, but one thing I thought was interesting that especially for these kids that came into that camp from small towns and places, like I think they were the only people who they
Oh,
knew who
that's what I
stuttered.
was gonna
And
say.
it was like their first time to be with other people who stuttered.
Yeah.
And it was like
Oh,
a moment of support
yeah.
and community, really, which made
Yeah.
it kind of special.
In many schools, in small towns especially, they are the only person they've ever known who stuttered. One of someone I babysit for, who's the director of camp, not the one you're thinking of, but a different one I babysit for, who was the old director of camp. I
Yeah.
babysat for both directors. Anyway, he had never met a person who stutters until he was in college. So
Mm.
it's common enough that a lot of people struggle. A lot of people are people who stutter. About in the general population, we think about 1% of the
Mm.
population, which is
Mhm.
like, hundreds of millions, tens of millions, a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's just few enough where they could never meet someone else who stutters and who's been through the same things as them because it's a
Hmm.
very niche like issue to
Yeah.
have. It's the only disorder really where it's they have the same group of problems.
Right.
But so camp was focused completely on our emotions and reactions to stuttering and attitudes. And
Hmm.
a lot of those kids, the majority of those kids were bullied bad.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
lot of them also have co-occurring speech and language impairments. If you stutter, you're more likely to have a speech delay and a language impairment.
Mhm.
Um, a speech
Which
delay outside of stuttering, like not saying your R's.
with that, or sorry, with that, what
Mhm.
is your last bit on this? Because I think we
Oh,
want to
yeah,
make sure we
sorry.
have plenty of time for language impairment.
Not causes. So it's not caused by anxiety. It's not caused by big life events. A lot of
Hmm.
times people remember a big, like a move, and then their kids start stuttering and they think it's because of the move.
Hmm.
And really it's just maybe the move like started something in the kid's brain that made them stutter more all of a sudden, but they were already going to stutter at some point and the move may have just
Hmm.
been what starts it, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Vaccinations don't cause stuttering. Okay.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that one. Okay.
When to be concerned. Do they have a family member who stutters or used to stutter? Biggest one. Very important. Have they stuttered for 6 months to a year or more? So if they came in and they're at 3 years old and they're stuttering, and then at 4 they're still stuttering, they're much more likely to persist and keep
Hmm.
stuttering for longer. If they start stuttering after 3.5 years of age,
Hmm.
big one. So if they're
3 to 6 months.
3
Hmm.
and they start stuttering, less likely to continue than if they're 4. Most
Oh.
kids I've met who stutter in adults, they started at like 4 or 5.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, have they said it's hard to talk? Are they aware that their speaking is different? Um, and do they tense up or struggle while talking? So if they're displaying secondary characteristics like hard blinking, avoiding eye contact, just tension, you can tell, there's
Hmm.
tension instead of like stuttering easily and it's just there's repetitions, but their speech moves along.
Yeah.
But stuttering.
Okay. Interesting.
Finally, this is our last section for the slideshow. Late talkers. Okay, so late talkers by definition are 2 years old, 24 months. Um, they say fewer than 50 words,
Hmm.
fewer than 50 discrete words that hold meaning. So not like gibberish that sounds like a
Right.
word, but they hold
Yeah.
meaning. And they are not combining two words yet. Big ball, ball go.
Hmm.
We know words and
Hmm.
numbers 1 and 2. Yeah, so they're late talkers. 10 to 20% of
That's a big
two-year-olds
number. Wow.
are late talkers. A lot
Hmm.
of them. It's not uncommon, but expected outcomes. A lot of these kids normalize quickly,
Hmm.
and it's just a delay, a language delay, as opposed to a language disorder. So by 3 years of age, about half of these kids should be, when I say normal, and that's a controversial term, sort of, but they should be. I just realized I should probably change that. But about 50% of kids have caught up to the other
Okay.
kids in their language. So at 2, it's like, brr, brr, so
Hmm.
they're on the same level as their peers. By 4 years old, another 25% have caught up. And so now 75% of them are normal. Kids who don't catch up. Some of them have autism.
Hmm.
Some of them have intellectual disability, and these are not mutually exclusive, any of these terms. Intellectual disability, and some of them have language impairments. So those are the three most common outcomes. And if you
What?
haven't caught up by like 6, if your language isn't caught up, you're likely to have problems for your entire life because language disorders are lifetime. It's like ADHD.
Mhm.
You don't, there's no cure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what counts as an intellectual disorder? How do you define that?
That is nationally an IQ of below 70.
Okay. Hmm.
So 69 below, I think technically. Some places might do. Yeah. I mean that's the norm.
Hmm.
It kind of depends on where you are. I think some places do 75. A standard score of 75, I mean. But
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
won't get into the weeds.
That one's, yeah,
But
yep, pretty straightforward.
yeah, so a lot of kids with language impairments, like most of them were late talkers. But most late talkers do not have language impairments or anything wrong with them, and it's just a delay. So it's
Hmm.
difficult to know when to be concerned. It's
So
complicated.
when you were little, Izzy, I used to hear people say, oh, sometimes you've got those kids that walk early and are really good with their motor development. They are not big talkers. That their brains are so busy getting their bodies moving that they're not paying attention. No, that was an old one. So I'd heard that when you
Yeah.
guys were little.
There
Like,
is research. There are
mhm,
some ways to differentiate late talk to predict rather
mhm,
which late talkers won't catch up. And one of the biggest identifiers is kids who use is communicatory a word? I feel like it should be, but it's not, is it?
mhm. I don't know it if it
Who
is.
use I'm gonna get it, but it came to me. Gestures to communicate.
Okay, yeah.
So 2-year-olds who like are more likely to nod and, reach for
Um,
things and like if they can wave and which they should be able to wave obviously by 2. Um, they're because it that the theory is, and that has held up in the research, the theory is that their language skills are developed and they just haven't started talking yet.
right.
So they're still
But they're communicating.
communicating with
Yeah.
language. Language is anything. Sign language
Hmm.
is language, gestures are language.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Which, okay, so this may be coming on a slide. What about kids that are learning two and three languages at the same time? So they're in a dual language
Yeah.
household.
Yeah,
I assume
cognitive
that impacts
non-cognitive.
late talking?
Um, so for late talkers and language impairments, really again, it's just genetics. That's it. Unless they have an intellectual cognitive problem,
Okay.
that will affect everything they do, including language. It really just comes down to genetics. Learning 2 languages at the same time, it's possible that the one of the languages could lag a little bit
Okay.
behind. So only speaking, if there's a child and they're only speaking Spanish at home and they just got to Pines and they're 4 and that's how they're learning English, maybe they watch Cocomelon and then they're at
Mhm.
Pines. I would not expect their language to be similar to their peers, but
Right.
that's due to a lack of exposure, right? So we
Hmm.
can only learn what we're taught or what
Hmm.
we're exposed to.
Right.
Um, and so for those children, yes, it can look like a language delay, but it's just them learning and trying to catch up.
Hmm.
Sort of the same with grammar. Sometimes they'll be a little bit behind like marking past tense because they do it differently in their
Right.
language. But there there's no research to support that children who are dual language learners or they're English language learners or they're even exposed to 3 languages at home, changing that to tell their parents that they should only learn one language helps not at all. None.
Okay. Yeah.
There's actually a lot of good research on children with disabilities who are learning 2 languages, and they don't even fall behind. So kids with autism and even Down
Hmm.
syndrome, the human
Hmm.
brain is crazy, and basically our the mechanisms, like the skills we have for learning one language, will be the same no matter how many languages we learn. So
Okay.
if you have a language impairment, you're going to struggle learning both languages.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So that's really kids who speak two languages at home. You need the big differentiator is asking their parents how they are in the other language.
Yeah. Okay.
If they speak Spanish and English, are they having problems in Spanish too, or is it just in English? If they're also having problems in Spanish, same for speech. If they're difficult to understand in Spanish and English, then that indicates a disorder rather than a delay.
Well, and it's so common. Like I think we have one child at Pines who's doing Spanish, English, and Mandarin,
Hmm.
just with nanny and grandma, and
Yeah.
there's one with Rush. It's just so interesting to me, all the different languages.
Hmm. That'll be
And
hard for reading and writing because it's such a different system.
different alphabet. Yeah.
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 And it's not an alphabetic language, it's a symbol system. So they have their symbols. The reading
Hmm.
research gets really in the weeds because it's such a different thing to learn. Like they have to teach it so
Hmm.
different.
Right.
But
Great.
anyway,
Awesome.
yeah, but learning two languages does not cause language disorder.
Okay.
Maybe a
Hmm.
slight delay. Um, oh yeah, okay, this is language I forgot. I made this yesterday and I already forgot. Um, so these are the differences between kids with normal language and not normal language in
Okay.
at the time they will be at Pines. So we have late talking. And then most kids by 4 years of age are marking past tense and plurals
Hmm.
almost perfectly. We call it marking for finiteness, so
Hmm.
time and plurality. Almost perfectly. Like there should be very few errors, and the errors should be on irregular past tense and irregular plurals. Like wolves, you know,
Uh,
what are the instead of
mhm.
wolves? That's a super bad example. Like ran instead of run.
Okay, yeah.
Except they should know that one because it's very common. But anyway, you guys know what I mean. And then by five
Generally.
years old, about 90% of their utterances should be completely grammatical.
Hmm.
So they're not saying her go to the store at four
Hmm.
or five. Um,
And you're also assuming the parents or caregivers are modeling proper grammar for them at home.
yeah. It will if
Yeah.
their parents are modeling improper grammar, then their parents probably have
Mhm.
language impairments too. So it's not because of they don't have
Okay.
this is controversial sort of because
Yeah.
of people think different things about like it's basically nature versus nurture. So some people
Right.
think nature's more important and more people
Hmm.
think the language you're exposed to is what you learn. Even at Vanderbilt there's people on different camps and they call each other the
Hmm.
dark side. Um, I thought I had a good example of, yeah, okay, so here, I'll go to this part first. So, language impaired kids. In kindergarten, they're still producing grammatical errors. By kindergarten,
Hmm.
most kids should produce very few grammatical errors. And you know what it looks like as people who work with children.
Hmm.
You know the kids who are less grammatically sound than others.
Hmm.
By 5 years of old, by 5 years of age, in the kids with language impairments, about only 60% of their utterances are grammatical. And this is actually a
Oh,
range,
wow.
70, but
Okay.
um, so a lot of their like that's measuring by sentence. So in one sentence, do they have a grammatical error or
Hmm.
not? So in 10
Hmm.
sentences, 6 of them are perfect, pristine.
Right.
And by six, 65% are grammatical. So they're also improving slower. They learn slower. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. And then so these are common. I'm just obviously, as you have seen, really bad at thinking of examples on the fly, but
Yeah.
common errors for kids with language impairments. Her is running instead of she is
Hmm.
running. That one is huge. I've
We see
never
that
seen
one.
it in a kid that does not have a language impairment, and I see it in so many of my kids that the
Hmm.
third grader I worked with, she was 10. Was she 11 by the end? 10 or 11. She, her go to the store always the whole
Uh-huh.
time, and
Mhm.
that is just so very language impairment core.
Yeah.
Because pronouns are very intuitive when you think about it.
Yeah.
Hard to
Hmm.
teach a kid like subject versus object
Yeah.
um and then oh yeah, another big one is where you are going.
Instead of where are you
So
going?
when you're asking questions, so subject,
Hmm.
auxiliary, inversion, which in some
Hmm.
languages, mm, I don't know enough. I was gonna give an example of a language. I don't know. Sometimes that is how they ask questions, like they flip the object with the
Hmm.
verb, so that could
Yeah. But
It's
if
much
if they're
better.
just if they're just speaking English at home and they're
Yeah,
saying, there's an
where you
issue.
are going at like 5 is a red flag. Really, the biggest one is past tense. It's
Okay.
yeah, because with kids with language impairments are bad at past tense. They usually don't mark it at all. If kids are marking it
Hmm.
wrong, like I jumped it on the trampoline, that
Hmm.
shows that they still understand the concept of like expressing a time of
Right.
with their language, and that usually means they're on the trajectory to learn normal past tense marking. But kids who are language impaired, like it's I go to the store, for example, they don't they didn't I
I went
went
to
to
this.
the store would be right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, in language impairments, the kids who don't catch up by 5 or 6, that's a lifelong disability. They will always have problems um, learning language and using language to express themselves. It's harder for them to learn new vocabulary words.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot more repetition and practice. It's harder for them to use proper grammar. And these kids often understand better um, than
And
that. Like
communicate.
the speech they communicate is always at a lower level than what they understand. So you don't necessarily have to like super simplify it. Um,
Hmm.
but and then I had one more point that I forgot. Oh yeah, these kids also, kids with language impairments, are very likely to struggle with reading.
Yeah.
So, about 40 to 60% of kids with language impairments, you can just say about 50, make it easy.
Mm-hmm.
About half of them, and this means they don't have autism or an intellectual disability, it's just a pure language impairment.
Mm-hmm.
And often they have bad speech too, but they will struggle to read. And that's dyslexia. That's sounding out words. That's like the very beginning stages of learning how to read.
Mm-hmm.
And these kids, obviously, their receptive language is such that they don't understand things as
Right.
well as others, and that whether it's print or oral language, it's the same. So when they're reading expository writing in school, narrative writing, they will struggle to understand just as they do with oral language. So
Hmm.
technically, all kids with language impairment sort of fall under the umbrella of reading disability because it, you
Well,
know,
that's super hard for them because it's not like if you are a person that does not have a language impairment, but you
mm,
have dyslexia, you could do audiobooks. You could do
doing,
like your
yeah.
brain is still processing the stories and the information. But if you've got
Yeah.
the language impairment too, it's like a double whammy of how do you understand the world around you with written,
Yes. And
you
these
know,
kids, their nonverbal IQs to I'm
Mhm.
getting a little in the weeds, but the kids with language impairments with the specific diagnosis I'm talking about have normal IQ. So
Right.
it's like the primary diagnosis is language impairment. If they had
Mhm.
an intellectual disability, that would be the primary diagnosis. Language
Right.
impairment would be secondary to that. So these kids, like I have kids and their IQ is normal. Like I
Hmm.
have a 6-year-old. I love her dearly. She's 6 years old. Her speech unintelligible. Her language, she struggles so much. Her grammar is horrible. She's
Hmm.
just so hard to communicate with. She's
Hmm.
so funny and creative and
Hmm.
interesting. But kids don't understand her, her teachers don't understand her, and she's cognitively normal. She's
Right.
smarter than most of the kids in her class. Like she's a little
Right.
above average. So it's
Hmm.
just the most interesting population. I like it. It's studying them.
That's why you do what you do.
Yeah.
Okay, along these lines, one other, and then I know we need to keep moving. Because we do want to talk a little bit about
It's the
dyslexia.
last slide, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Okay, so question for you. What if you have kiddos who like have been with a teacher all year, can't keep her
Yeah.
name straight? Either still call her teacher or call her by the other teacher's name. Is
Yeah.
that a language issue? Is that any thoughts on that one?
Yeah.
That showed up last week. Someone mentioned it coming out of a conference, and I was like, oh yeah, I wonder.
They say teacher.
They'll either just keep calling him teacher, or they'll call them the other teacher's name when the two people look
Huh.
nothing alike.
Do they, you might not know, but do the teachers correct the child
Mhm.
when they say it
Mhm.
wrong?
Every time.
Okay, to me, that's either or. All of these things could be the same at
Mhm.
the same time.
Right.
Cognitively, they might be a little lower. Their
Mhm.
memory might be a little bit worse, which could be, just
Mhm.
they have a bad memory. It could be secondary to ADHD. It could be,
Mhm.
secondary to lower. cognitive scores without an intellectual disability.
Yeah.
You don't talk about that a lot, but the kids that are like 71 to 85, their IQs are there. They don't have an intellectual disability, but
Hmm.
it's much harder for them to learn.
Yeah.
That's one standard deviation or more below the mean.
Yeah.
Um, so it
Well, and
could be that.
where we are in Houston, where there's such privilege and so many really highly successful parents, which
Yeah.
probably goes along with probably higher IQ parents,
Yeah.
it's tough because everyone is so high achieving to not be a high achiever. It's almost like something's wrong, but it's just their
Yeah,
norm,
they're
maybe
normal.
the average. Hmm.
Because of the way we measure success, not to get philosophical, but it's just sad for a lot of these kids because their parents want them to be lawyers instead of wanting them to like be happy and live a meaningful life. And so it's
Yeah.
difficult when that's like you're dealing with as an educator because you want to levy their expectations and say we can help them with intervention. Because with
Mhm.
language impairments, we'll always struggle.
Yeah.
There are a lot of famous people with language impairments though. I can clock them on The Bachelor, a lot of them.
Oh, yeah. You can see it when it's.
Remember that one guy?
I've chosen not to watch The Bachelor this time. I've been
You
so
could, there's an
disgusted.
FLP on The Bachelor. Someone sent a
Oh,
picture.
very nice. Hey,
Anyway.
one other thing too is what about because before we get to dyslexia, what about the ability to hold, oh my gosh, I'm losing language. I don't have it.
Yeah. Are you
To,
thinking of working memory?
yeah, so to you've learned something, then you lose it. To retain, what about retention?
Oh,
That learning it and then losing it, learning it. So you've got your letters
yeah.
and just year after year, because we see that in a couple of
Oh,
kids.
with reading?
Not even just reading, but it's almost like the things they could do, they get to
Yes.
master by the end of each year, and then they go
Yes.
home for the summer, and it's like it's all gone. Or even it
Yes.
might just even be over Christmas break, and then suddenly you're like, wait a second, we
Mm,
had this, and now it's that retention is a real
yeah.
issue.
Normal kids. I'll use
Okay.
the term normal. It's fine.
Yes.
Normal kids who don't have anything, no diagnoses,
Mm-hmm.
they will learn something and remember almost all of it and then build on that knowledge. Normal
Right.
learners in general.
Right.
Kids with language impairments or dyslexia, or even in some cases speech delays, they're
Mhm.
not normal learners. And so,
Right.
or intellectual disability, right? So,
Right.
whenever you have a learning disability like those, that's what happens. And it's exhausting to be to
Mm-hmm.
teach these kids. There's a professor at Middle Tennessee State University who has dyslexia and he's big in he's a researcher and he defines dyslexia as kids who it's hard for them to learn and the kids
Mm-hmm.
are hard to teach. So that for him is a
Uh,
diagnostic indicator specifically of
mm-hmm.
dyslexia. If kids are easy to teach, then they don't have it.
Right.
This part, and that's important to know while you're teaching them that you're not doing something wrong. It's important for parents to know, but it's
Mm-hmm.
tricky. I would say if kids are losing a lot of knowledge and the other kids in their class aren't, there's something behind that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. It doesn't mean they necessarily qualify for a diagnosis. It could just mean they have a little lower cognition. Could mean they have a language impairment if it's language skills. Um,
Right.
if it's reading, if they can't remember their letters pretty easily and quickly, then that's an indicator of
Yeah.
reading ability.
Well, so having said that, let's transition just a little bit to dyslexia before we finish. Because I always think it's really interesting. You've said a few things over the years, like you can kind of count on one or two fingers the kids who, even when they're 2 and 3, if they're struggling with certain things, you also need to keep an eye on them for dyslexia later on.
Oh yeah.
Language impairment would be one of those.
Yeah. Good
Um,
work.
I've
There's
been paying attention
two
as well.
really big ones.
Yeah.
So, early on, early indicators of dyslexia. This is my favorite. All day I read research articles on this, and I haven't been. I've had a month of like light classes, and it's all I think about. Um, we'll go in the order we've already gone in. Kids with speech delay or speech sound disorders are at a higher likelihood of having dyslexia. Um, but the underlying cause, the primary cause is not the speech delay. It's one of two things.
Hmm.
It's deficits in phonological, sorry, okay. Deficits in phonological awareness skills, or it's language impairments. And
Hmm.
that's true for the general population. So, have you done a training on phonological awareness? Also called Okay, so phonological processing is the umbrella term. And then there's three parts, and one of the parts is phonological awareness. And this is just the ability to manipulate the sound structure of language. So, what's a word that rhymes with sing?
Being.
Yeah, that's a random one. Sing, sing,
Uh-huh.
flower. Which word does not rhyme?
Wait, what'd you say? Oh, flower doesn't rhyme.
Yeah. Okay,
I was
what's
like, power. I was still rhyming.
you're just a poet.
Yeah, yeah.
What's what's bat without the b? Hmm. What's bat without the at?
B,
Huh?
b,
What's the first sound in the word bat?
b.
Hmm. What are
Mm-hmm.
the all three? How many sounds are in the word bat? Three.
Three.
And then segment those sounds. B, a.
Mm-hmm.
That is all phonological awareness under the
Right.
umbrella. All of those, and then blending it together. Um, so one of the earliest and most reliable and valid, internally valid indicators early on. So the kids you're working with early on
Mhm.
is weak phonological awareness skills. That's hard for like teachers to recognize in a classroom environment without like I couldn't recognize it even one-on-one with kid without a standardized test usually. So we
Mhm.
have a test and
Right.
it's pretty much what I just did.
Mhm.
Um, it's we do the C-top most often if you ever see that, but it's asking kids to manipulate the sound structure of language. We also
Right.
know that there's like studies, there's a big research, there's a big research article from Australia. They used to be big. They used to like not start teaching kids how to read until they were 6 or 7 because they thought it was like too early and it would confuse them. They've changed that
Mhm.
since then. But they tested phonological awareness in kids before they had learned how to read. Like they hadn't learned their letters yet, and all of the kids were bad. Like they couldn't do it at all. And
Mhm.
then that was in preschool. The kids were 6 and 7 years old. And then they taught them how to read in first kindergarten and first grade. And by the end of first grade, most of the kids were good, and all the kids
Right.
with good phonological awareness were good readers. Some
Mhm.
kids had bad phonological awareness, but they were also good readers.
Hmm.
And then a subset of kids with bad phonological awareness were bad readers. So, does that make sense? It develops reciprocally, reading and phonological awareness. Does that make sense? Am I getting too complicated?
Too complicated, but that's okay.
Basically, that's one of the big indicators though. If a kid
Yeah.
can't rhyme in preschool, that's a
Yeah.
concern.
Yeah.
Kid can't identify rhyming words or think of a word that rhymes. They should be able
Mhm.
to. You can do and then the other big test for preschool age kids, what's cupcake without the cake?
Uh-huh. Oh, interesting.
So
Cut. Mm-hmm.
so, like compound words instead of a
Yeah.
single word because that's pretty hard for young
Yeah.
kids,
That's
just
interesting
in
too.
terms of maturity level.
But you
What's
were telling
baseball
me,
without the base?
yeah.
Ball.
Oh.
If they can't
You
do
were
that, that's a concern.
You were saying there's a big, and we've heard it from some parents, like a big push. Like some people are like, oh, get started with just like identify those kids with dyslexia at 4 years old, get on it early. You can keep it from being a major problem. But you were saying really, you still hold to the old rule of thumb, which is really into first grade if they're not, if they've not really caught up.
Yeah, I would say I would say you can tell the kids who are likely to struggle. I can name kids right now at Pines and I know they'll have dyslexia. Um,
Hmm.
you and I know that when they're 5. Um, my intervention study, I'm studying an intervention is what I mean, is with kids who are 6. And
Hmm.
so a lot of my kids, they're one of my sweet little Emma, who I love so much. I've already talked about her. She doesn't know all of the letters of the alphabet and she doesn't know the sounds they make. And she's received 5 hours of intervention outside of me at her Montessori school
Every
um,
week.
for every week for a year. And she doesn't know her letter names and sounds. She should be receiving intervention at 5. So
Hmm.
it's sort of like kids who are going to struggle to read, that's usually something that you struggle with your
Yeah.
whole life. Sometimes you can compensate. So I have like it was hard for me to learn. I don't it was hard for me to learn how to read. I don't really know. I probably would have qualified for dyslexia, but I didn't get tested in time. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't have any language problems and I have a good memory. So I'm able to memorize words pretty easily. And so I'm able to I'm a fine reader, even though it's hard for me to read. And that's with no intervention other than you reading with me all the time. Counts. That kind of was intervention. So it's sort of just a bit, there's a lot of factors. But so there's phonological awareness, the rhyming and baseball and cupcake. Then there's language, broader language skills. So kids with language impairments struggle with vocabulary and grammar. Those are the two biggies. And they
Mm-hmm.
also usually have bad phonological awareness. So it's hard for them to like rhyme. But the kids with language impairments are very likely to have dyslexia. Like more than half of them have
Mm-hmm.
dyslexia, especially if they're a little lower cognitively.
Right.
So those are the kids where it's hard for them to learn language
Mm-hmm.
orally, and so they're already behind. And then we read so much as, I'm sorry, as learners, we learn new words and we learn new like grammatical constructs through reading. By the
Mm-hmm.
time you're in third grade, you're reading to learn, they say,
Right.
textbooks and
Yeah.
stuff for knowledge. So when kids are already behind their language and they also can't read, they just fall further behind. It's called the Matthews effect, if you want to look it up.
Yeah.
But they fall further behind because they don't have access to
Yeah.
reading complex texts. So those are the kids
Mm-hmm.
that really should be a concern.
Yeah.
But I would say, I mean, in kindergarten, good. And even like, what's the year before kindergarten? What animal is that?
It'd be turtles and ladybugs.
Turtles and ladybugs.
Teddy bears. Mm-hmm.
Like I would be rhyming, and I think you guys already do
Oh
such
yeah.
a better
We
job than most. Like really, you do.
do a considerably better job than most, I would
Yes.
say.
Yeah. Even
We're at the
I
top of the
remember
game.
someone did the buckets with like P words, and it was like panda and pickle.
Hmm. Yeah.
I
They have
think
that we have that in the rainbow fish even. Like frogs and
yes,
rainbow fish start
stuff
that.
like that.
Hmm.
Having good like re under the response to intervention framework that is in place nationwide at this
Hmm.
point. Having good evidence-based classroom instruction in early in the rainbow fish and basically
Hmm.
4 years old on, I'd say some of
Hmm.
the kids who would have struggled more will be closer to normal because of
Yeah.
that good early intervention, even at the classroom level, not one-on-one. That's important, and you should be really everything should be include words and visuals. Like when you're talking about
Hmm.
the months, you should always be showing
Hmm.
the words for it. And you guys already do so much of this, so
Yeah.
much reading and print awareness too. Everyone is so good at pointing out the author and you read the title and then the author and the illustrator and then it's page
Hmm.
one. It's these print
Hmm.
concepts that kids with dyslexia will struggle to learn.
Right.
Um, yeah,
Izzy, I think we're out of time.
are we?
I think
Remember
we're
when I
at a
thought this was
full.
going to be like 20 minutes?
What does your timer
I said I
say?
can't talk for an hour. No, it
I was
doesn't.
like, oh, we're not gonna have a problem filling an hour.
Uh,
I think that was, I hope everybody has enjoyed it if you're not watching it either tomorrow or after. But Izzy starts her externship tomorrow.
so
Yay,
excited.
first time in a public
Want to be done
school.
with the
They're
kid?
lucky to have you as well, Pike. I'm so proud
No,
to be your
stop.
mom. All that I mean, it's and I have to say Pines has played a role, I think, in you love
Oh
what
yeah.
you but had I not worked at Pines, I don't know that you would have found this. I mean,
No,
so I'm
Pine was the reason. My
Mhm.
junior, to give the whole story, since I hear we have so much time left to talk. Um, the whole story is my junior year of high school, and I didn't. My grades were always fine, but I struggled in school. Like I didn't learn very well, and I didn't try very hard. And I love it.
Something
Um,
just right there.
I tried enough, but it was hard for me to read, and I didn't study like my friends did.
It says a lot about your intelligence, though, that you could still.
I slid by, and that is something that
Yeah.
should be considered when you're teaching kids, seriously. So my
Mhm.
supervisor, Dr. Shilley's the same, where she probably has some lower language skills and she has dyslexia and
Mhm.
ADHD, but she's a genius professor because she's able to understand her own brain and compensate. Compensating is huge. And you can
Mhm.
teach kids how to compensate. So much of what I do, other people with ADHD taught me.
Mhm.
So there is so much hope for all of these children. Everyone will be okay.
Yeah.
What was I talking about?
Oh, just Pines that when you were a
Oh
junior.
yeah, I was a junior and I liked working with kids because I was at Pines all the time.
Mhm.
And I didn't really, I kind of wanted to just be a preschool teacher was what I wanted. But my mom said,
That doesn't pay much
"Hey,
money.
you can always be preschool, maybe study. you could do occupational therapy, or maybe you said play therapy at the time, or
Mhm.
speech therapy. And then you can do, still work with kids and it'll be a little, and I was like, okay, junior year of high school. And then here we are. No one has that
And,
story.
and
Everyone I
you're
know
probably
changed their major 10 times. They didn't know about speech pathology. It was the whole thing.
you're probably going
Very
to end up with your PhD in this. And if the goal works out, be a professor of speech pathology
Yeah.
and working with kids and inspiring other generations. So not
Oh,
bad. Go Pines.
I'm one of
Go
the luckiest
Izzy.
people I know, truly. I got so lucky so early on, and I'm lucky that I love it so much.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to show this video to a couple of our teachers might want to share it with their kids because other teachers' daughters are considering going into speech pathology. So,
Don't let all my big scary words scare you. I
yeah.
talked too much about niche topics. It's not that hard. You can do it.
All right. Well, thank you, Izzy, and good luck tomorrow. Love from all of us at Pines. We'll be thinking of
Anytime.
you as we're doing this. You'll be finishing up. Okay.
Bye. Goodbye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.